Alright folks, this is Fairview, Utah, probably about an hour and a half south of Salt Lake City. This is the hometown of Laura Ann Aime. She grew up here. Her parents ended up moving north off of Highway 89 up towards Provo in a town called Salem because her dad wanted to be a little closer to work. He worked at Geneva Steel, which is just off a Utah lake, and Laura, who had just recently finished her 10th grade of school at North Sand Peak High School, south of here in Mount Pleasant, decided to move up to American Fork where she had friends and just couch crash there for a while. And she lived there until October, Halloween night of 1974.
Just explaining my perspective on the situation. I think I've changed, for I feel strange and thought I'd let you know.
Okay, we're in American Fork, Utah, which is just south of Salt Lake City and Draper, pretty close to the prison that Ted spent some time during his 90-day diagnostic later in 1976. But anyway, Halloween night 1974, Laura had been at a house party at a trailer in Orem, which is just south of here, kind of down that direction. You can see Highway 89, those cars going up there. But she got bored at the party and apparently tried to hitchhike all the way back to American Fork, where she was kind of couch crashing with some friends. One friend in particular named Judy Olson and another person named Marin Beveridge. But anyway, this trailer was owned by Stephen Bullock. It wasn't really happening. It's kind of boring. It's Halloween night. So she decides to hitchhike back. Now, according to some police reports that Mike Fisher found later, she actually stopped at the Jack and Jill bowling alley and waited for a friend to pick her up. and take her back downtown, which isn't that far from here. She probably could have walked it, but anyway, this place was kind of hard to find actually because it's always been here, but and here's the Jack and Jill bowling alley, right? But guess what? This is not the original Jack and Jill bowling alley as it was in 1974 when Laura would have been here. They moved this actually just a couple years later, like 1976, I believe. Actually went inside and met the owner of the place who owned it then too. And his name is Jack, but he bought it from someone else named Jack. And so I don't know, I didn't quite get the whole story on that, but it was kind of interesting because I went in there and talked to him, and I'd seen pictures of this guy in local newspapers, and it was kind of crazy because he looked exactly the same, like 42 years later, 43 years later. He looked a little bit older, but basically the same guy. But remember that sign, right? So that's the original sign. The one good thing he did tell me that it certainly makes a lot of sense. This is Highway 89 we're coming up to. It's the original state highway. Some people call it State Street. As a matter of fact, you can see on the sign here, you can see where it says State Street. Right here, this place, the Recreation Outlet. This is the original bowling alley right here. This is where Laura would have, she would have been waiting for the ride from her friend to get downtown. And as you can see, it's, you know, it definitely looks like it could have been a bowling alley. And Jack told me that, well, the reason we moved it, we were trying to upgrade. The roof was caving in on this place back in those days. And it's kind of funny, I went in there at one point and it certainly looks like it could have been an old bowling alley. It's got an area that looks like it could have been a snack bar. It's got those old bathrooms. And I can imagine that the bowling lanes probably went towards the window. But anyway, kind of interesting. I can picture that sign sticking out right where it says Recreation Outlet. I'll bet that's where it was. And after she was picked up from her friend, and she had been hit up by a lot of cowboys trying to, you know, give her rides back into town, you know, she wasn't feeling that. She came back down this direction and supposedly went to a teenage hangout place called the Naughty Pine. And it is really hard to find any literature on the restaurant, the Naughty Pine, or Brown's Cafe, which she later supposedly was walking off into the evening to buy some cigarettes after she was pretty intoxicated. Yeah, but that's a different part of the story, which is coming up really quick. But this is American Fork, heading back down towards Robinson's Park, where she was last seen alive. Shortly before midnight, 1974, October 31st. All right, this is American Fork. This is Robinson's Park in American Fork. There's a library. There's a group of houses back here, older homes, an older subdivision, where Laura may have gone to her final party. According to the testimony of a Utah County deputy at the time who had done a bunch of research at the time on the case, but it was totally ignored later. This was discovered by Mike Fisher from Colorado. There were many kids who reported seeing Ted down here in the area as far back as early September. And at one point, Ted had even come to a particular house, which we're not sure of, where a person named Judy Olson lived. Laura was basically couch crashing ever since she got into American Fork. And Ted had actually come to her house, knocked on the door. Laura went outside, and she came back into the house very upset. He had said something to her, and her friend remembered her saying something like, you know, "Get the F out of my life, leave me alone." And then later, she disappeared from this park, according to the testimony of several of her friends. One girl named Marin Beveridge claimed that Laura had been drinking vodka shots with a group of boys, and was pretty intoxicated and she wanted to go get some cigarettes. So she came down here, walked down Highway 89, which leads off to the left here, to a place called Brown's Cafe, which is like kind of a teenage hangout. Ted was seen there with her a couple of times as well. There was another place called the Naughty Pine, where Marin Beveridge says that Ted actually came in there and Laura was already there with her. Ted came in and tried to sit down next to her, and Laura jumped up, moved away, and he said something to the effect of, "You can't go anywhere, I'm going to rape you." Now, Halloween night, shortly before midnight, according to Marin, Laura was last seen walking off this direction, heading down towards Brown's Cafe to get some cigarettes. And then after that, she totally disappeared. You know, and you could theorize all day about that. How did that happen? How did he get her? I mean, this is a busy main street. You know, and the thought comes to mind that maybe Ted knew where she was that night. It's possible. And maybe he saw her walking along the street and pulled up next to her and said, "Hey, Laura, what's going on?" Because obviously he knew her. This is October 31st, and he had been coming down here to harass her since early September, if you believe the reports from Dick Smith and the witnesses. And she probably said something like, "Yo, hey, I'm going to get some cigarettes," just drunk. And Ted probably said, "Well, why don't you hop on in? I've got cigarettes." Ted was a smoker, you know, and maybe he just had some. And then at that point, he could have taken her anywhere he wanted. The canyon where she was found is up that direction, Timpanogos Canyon, up by the cave. And she was found down by the creek bed about 1,500 feet past the cave visitor center, which I'll show you here in a few minutes. But anyway, according to Dick Smith, several witnesses said that Ted had come down here and seen Laura first at a football field where a bunch of the kids were sitting around, and Ted came and sat down and started flirting with Laura. And then one of the boys like stuffed some leaves down her halter top or something to that effect, and Ted got upset and said, "You can't do that, she's with me," you know, kind of inferring that he had already met her before. But anyway, this is Robinson's Park, where she supposedly disappeared. Halloween night, 1974. She wasn't found until Thanksgiving Day, which is a full month. Let's take a look at this. William S. Robinson Park. Fairly old park. Okay, this is Timpanogos Canyon. Roll up my window here. Heading up Timpanogos Canyons, heading up east. If you keep going on this road, you end up in an area called Midway, which is up by Park City. But this is the road, this is where Laura Aime was found up here Thanksgiving Day, 1974, by a couple of BYU students that were supposedly hiking. Now, I came up here a while back and spoke to a forester, and she verified that the spot is actually where Laura was found. It was found about she was found about 1,500 feet past the visitor center, the cave. There's a Timpanogos cave up here, and there's all kinds of funny, you know, urban legends about, oh yeah, Ted had a cave up here, the Ted Bundy cave. Totally untrue. Basically, what happened is when she disappeared, when Ted grabbed her downtown in American Fork, which is about 10 minutes the other direction, he took her up here. There was about 5 inches of snow, and you got to remember, it's midnight. This place was indeed wide open back in those days. They didn't have a gate. It would have been easy to drive up here, but there were 5 inches of snow on this road. It was actively snowing that night. And more than likely what happened is Ted took her up here, and there's a specific turnaround spot, did his thing with her, and then just simply just dumped her naked body down the side of the hill, and I'll show you where that is. Coroner reports claim that she was only dead for about a week, but we believe from doing some specific pig studies, as far as like calculating decomposition rates in particular temperatures and altitudes, that he basically took her up here that same night, raped her, killed her, dumped her on the side of the road, and she rolled down and ended up by the stream, and it was snowing. She was covered with a certain layer of snow, and for that entire month the temperatures never rose above 50 degrees in the American Fork area, and this is actually at a higher altitude. Now what's kind of interesting is that people say, oh, well, she had makeup on and her hair was shampooed, etc. Well, her hair was shampooed. Now here's the visitor center right here for the cave, and it looks almost exactly the same as it did back in those days. It's really weird. I've seen pictures from the same area. So about 1,500 feet up here, where the river crosses, is basically where she was found. I'll show you here. Entering Uinta National Forest. Getting very, very close. But the point is that the little hiking trail that these kids were on, it wasn't really actually just a power line. Okay, so here's one pull off. Now the river switches right about here. Yep, right there. There's the river, and it's over on this side now. Now if you look right here, there is a pullout. We'll walk back here a little bit. And she said that this was here back then. Now this is the trail that the kids were supposedly walking on where they saw her. Let's walk down there a little bit. And you can see the power lines. This was a power line service trail. Very, very close to where she was found. So I think what my point is with this is they weren't hiking. They were coming down here to make out, smoke pot, do something like that. And back in those days, that was a big thing. You know, people still do that, of course. But specifically in the 70s, kids would go look for places to hide out and do their thing, you know, as you do. So they weren't hiking back here. There's nowhere to go. It dead ends just a little ways down here. This is the culvert over here where the river switches. And it was on the north side of the river. And that's also according to Chris Eskridge, who was an FBI agent at the time, who we've been in contact with. And he pinpointed the exact spot. Now there's where the river comes out. Super high flow right now. Got a lot of spring runoff in June 7th today. You can see the power lines still coming down here. Makes complete sense. I love the thought that BYU students weren't really hiking, quote unquote. They were actually looking for somewhere to go hang out, drink, smoke pot, make out, whatever. I mean, there's rock climbers up here. These guys are rock climbing. But the spot where Laura Aime was found man, I can get right down there. Don't break my goddamn neck. Luckily, I'm very, very strong. Very, very agile. Ooh, baby. Can't really see it from that spot. and get a good vantage point from right over here. Didn't think you'd be hiking on this video, did you? And it's impossible to see because the water level is extremely high right now. But more or less, right there, right where I'm pointed, there's a little spot, and the hikers saw her from the vantage point up there. Now that is the road right there. You saw that car, right? Ted probably just dumped her right there. Fell down, very steep, and rolled right into that area. And right there, when it's lower, there's a sandbar, like a rock bar. Now, I'll show you where you can see the same spot. Mommy. Wow. Billy Goat Mortensen. You guys are rock climbing, sweet. I'm glad they were just rock climbing. It's a little creepy when you see a couple guys with no shirts on up in the woods. Okay, so that is that same spot. Kind of hard to see, but here's the trail. And you got to remember, in October, all these trees, the leaves would have been gone. Right over there. Saw that car? Makes complete sense. There's the culvert. Okay, so what the idea is that Ted came to this little pullout, did what he did, and then when he was finished, you got to remember it's midnight, snowy road, nobody's up here. Here is where the river changes. He pulled up to about right here, stopped and dumped her out. Simple as that. And then went on his merry way.